our state capitol. This is an informational briefing by the housing committees of your state legislature, the Senate and the House. We will, why don't we introduce ourselves first, beginning on my far left.
Mark Hashem, State House.
Nadine Nakamura, State House.
Tom Brower, also State House.
Willis Farrell, Senate.
Green Harimoto, Senate.
And as many of you know, this is the third in a series of hearings we've been having over the interim. The first one was with Hawaii Public Housing Authority, whose mission, of course, is to work with our very low-income residents. We had the HHFDC soon thereafter, working with developers and government agencies and others. And today we're hearing from developers, those private sector as well as nonprofit. And we want to hear what they're doing, what they have done, and possible suggestions for the state legislature or the city or whoever they may be in order to basically build more affordable housing units, whether they be rentals or market for or for sale type of homes. We do have one individual, Stanford Carr, had a conflict. He will not present. However, in his place, we will ask Reverend Bob Nakata, who is with FACE and a very active individual as an advocate, to help as well and give some testimony. And if we have time at the end, we'll even see if any of you folks in the audience want to speak or give some suggestions. Chair Brower, anything further?
Well, I think our senator covered it, and I would like to thank him because during this interim, he's worked very hard. I've been following some of the tasks that he's accomplished, and I appreciate him including the House in a lot of his work.
Thank you, and appreciate it.
That's what you wrote, right?
Good house member, huh? No.
You train on.
So with that, what we're looking at, the format is relatively simple. We're going to give each speaker about 12 minutes or so to give a presentation. We'll open it up to a handful of questions from the people up here. So each presentation, approximately 15 minutes, give or take. And then at the very end, hopefully that'll be before 12:30. We will then open it up for anybody that wants to give some testimony or suggestions for the next legislative session. So with that, I'd like to call up Mr. David Z. Arakawa, executive, is that Z, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, Arakawa, from the Land Use Research Foundation of Hawaii. Thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Sparrow, Chair Brower, Senator Harimoto, Vice Chair Nakamura, and Representative Hashem. Dave Arakawa here on behalf of the Land Use Research Foundation. I thought I was batting second today, but then this morning I found out Stanford wasn't coming, so I guess I'm batting first. I am not a developer, but I've been working with developers since 1983, since I was born. Anyway, I'm not so much going to be telling you what we are doing. We will do that a little, but we're going to go over a number of challenges, ideas, and opportunities, looking at the informational briefing notice. We picked out those words: challenges, ideas, opportunities. And so we're going to, I guess, tell you what you folks have done since 2016, and a little bit about the effects on the industry, and also what we look forward to in 2018. As you all know, and everybody in this room knows, this is a very critical time. We have a critical housing shortage at all income levels, and we're in a period, a critical time window when interest rates are low, and they're going to be going up. It's a matter of, it's not when, it's not if, it's when. So in a year or two, the interest rates are going to go up, construction might start slowing. And we took a look at what's going on at the city, at HCDA, and on the neighbor islands, and at the legislature these past 2 years. And everybody's trying to improve the current system. So we thank all of you, we thank the legislature, and we thank your committees for doing everything you've done in the past couple years to improve the system. We also are thankful that these committees use the expertise of home builders, the economists, working with government officials, and also the housing advocates who are very important. They're the people on the ground, that put forth their ideas and energy. The legislation in 2016, by far, in all the years we've been covering the legislature, in 2016, by far, there was the most housing legislation, the most impactful legislation. And there are two, aside from the funding, there are two major bills. One was Senator Tokuda's bill on affordable rental housing and creating that working group. And the second was another committee that was formed, the TOD, the Infrastructure TOD group. And that's a huge, both of those committees or both of those working groups are going to bring us into the future the next 10 years and going to improve affordable housing and infrastructure. So in 2016, that was great. 2017, we didn't have that much legislation, but we're going to go over it. We're going to try and go over in our presentation some of the legislation that was done, and it covered a broad spectrum of things that will help the industry. We just like to say, going forward, and for the past 2 years, a lot of the success in the housing legislative area and what's going to be, you're going to be seeing in the future from housing developers and the community is based on trust, collaboration, working together, and partnerships. And so we commend the legislature for being very open and willing to work with everyone, and we're part of that, and so we would commit to doing so in the future. The first and major issue that we always face or challenge is a lack of access to available land and structure. So that's on page 2 of the presentation. And there's several strategies that the legislature and private developers and the county and the advocates have looked at, identifying government lands for housing mixed use and uses, and streamlining the request for proposals. If it's government lands, you cannot just sell it, you cannot just lease it, you have to go through a procurement procedure. The major work that had to be done is being done by those committees that you folks set up, the Affordable Housing, Rental Housing Committee and the TOD Committee, and that's identifying government lands and government housing units or government structures that could be retrofitted for housing. So that's a huge thing because it gives us a leg up or a head start on identifying these areas. There was a bill this year. There are a couple of bills this year. The bills listed in this handout are bills that failed, actually. Okay, the acts are in here too, but there are a number of bills that are well-intentioned and we hope to see next year. Land exchanges, there's an interesting bill, House Bill 790, there's a land exchange bill, I think it came out of the Senate. It's not in here right now, but it was to exchange private agricultural lands, hopefully with water infrastructure and water allocations for government-owned urban lands to be used for housing and mixed use. So that's an interesting bill. We hope to see it next year. We need to work further with DLNR and with the other parties on that land exchange bill. But that's a way that the state can use its land to build housing without having to expend money to do it, just by a land swap of equal value. The other bills that didn't make it through but would have extended the term of leases for public urban lands for housing and mixed use. And Representative Nakamura proposed a bill, a 99-year lease, as long as you build your housing project near a rail station. There was another bill by Representative Fukumoto, 75-year lease. So these are all longer than the 65-year lease leases that are allowed right now by DLNR. But it's very forward-thinking because developers will be looking for these types of opportunities. There are a number of bills to use ag lands for housing. You know, as a strong supporter of important ag lands, we don't know if we're so supportive of that issue, but we are supportive of housing for farmers or people who actually work full-time on the farm. There's the second major challenge is a lack of necessary off-site infrastructure, and all of you know, and we're preaching to the choir that all of the planning that's done at the state and at the state and at the county level, the general plans at the county level, the community development plans at the county level, zoning, state land use commission, those plans and those approvals are all geared to infrastructure. They determine where people are going to live, and then after that, the government agencies plan to put the infrastructure out there, get the infrastructure to where people are going to live. The frustrating thing for many developers is we've come to a situation where government does not want to raise taxes, and so what they do is they tell the developers, yeah, you can develop, and we'll put in the infrastructure. It's our duty to put in the infrastructure, but we'll put it in 20 or 30 years. If you want it now, in the next 5 years, you got to pay for it yourself. And what happens is the costs are passed on to the home buyer. And at least for one major developer in 2014 who did a major zoning change at the city and county for a $400,000 unit, over 120 grand was based on off-site infrastructure that the government was supposed to do, but the developer had to do it. So that cost is being passed on to the buyer. So a lot of these bills and a lot of these issues are looking at this past session and the TOD task force that was formed are looking at creative ways to fund infrastructure. Another challenge is the lack of financial resources, and there have been a number of bills that were proposed but didn't pass, and our main interest is repealing the $38 million cap on the conveyance tax distribution for the rental housing revolving fund. And there are a number of bills like that, and Chair Brower did propose that bill. It didn't pass, but we're looking forward to that and many more bills that address.
Was it the Senate's fault? What happened?
All I know is I have a note here, HHFDC supported it, but anyway. You know, there are other bills to increase the rental housing revolving fund share of the conveyance tax from 50% to 90%. So, you know, there are these bills that were floating, or these initiatives that are floating, and we hope to see more money in the rental housing revolving fund, because that is what funds the gap, the financing gap for developers who are doing 60% and below affordable housing. So they have about a 35 to 25% gap in funding that they have to do. So that's very important. So we look forward to those bills. There's a list of those bills. The other challenge is duplication and delays in the entitlement processes. And we have the State Land Use Commission here today, but my understanding is that the planning directors have been working with the State Land Use Commission. We've been working with the planning directors on ways that, different ways that land use districts can be changed based on petitions, broad petitions by the counties. So we look forward to that type of legislation. We also look forward to either legislation or change in the EIS rules that will address housing developments in the urban core, already urban areas, downtown, you know, and what processes they need to go through in that respect. One bill that we really supported was the State Historic Preservation Division increased funding for their staff. I'm not sure, the bill did not pass. I'm not sure if they got the positions in their budget, but we would support that. We would also support the Special Affordable Housing Task Force review of the Disability and Communication Access Board review and approval. So we're looking at that. One proposal that we will be making, and the HEPA. HEPA is doing a report on affordable housing. It's an action plan, and that action plan will include a third-party review ordinance for the counties. And the city and county of Honolulu has had it for almost 20 years, maybe about 15 years since I left the city. So that is working fine. Another issue would be time limit, 45-day time limit for county permits. The other challenge is inclusionary zoning exactions, and we found that the inclusionary zoning or IZ requirements, so that's a requirement on developers to do so many percent affordable housing, which the developers have accepted, 30% affordable housing, they accept that. Right now, the length or the term of it is 10 years, and we're able to sell units at a 10-year restricted period. In 1994, the city first came up with this inclusionary zoning law, and they had a 10-year restriction, which they still do today. But in 1999, when I was corp counsel, we had to rescind it because nobody was buying the houses. If you have a choice, if you and your children have a choice, if you are going to give your child 10 grand to put as a down payment, are you going to tell them, yeah, go buy the unit that has a 10-year restriction and you cannot sell it for 10 years, or if you do, you have to share appreciation in it, or are you going to buy this other house where you can live in it, improve it, and when you move out, you can take the equity and move up, right? So in 1999, we had to rescind that policy. That policy has since been reinstated, but the result of that, based on UHERO's study, is that fewer market units are being built for the gap group of residents with incomes above 140 AMI. So these are supervisory government employees and health professionals like nurses. So that is the sector that is not getting service. Because of the inclusionary zoning requirement, you have to build 30% below cost, below what it costs you. So it has, we call it the Corolla and Lexus effect, right? So if you're forced to build 30% Corollas at a loss, then you need to build Lexuses to make up the difference from what you lost. So the people who would normally buy Camrys don't have Camrys to buy, right? You know, so that's what's happening in our market today. Maui had passed the IZ ordinance in 2006, and for an 8-year period from 2006 to 24, and they did that against the testimony of experienced developers and housing developers and experienced economists. And in that 8-year period from 2006 to 2014, Maui and the Maui Housing Directors here, they had only one affordable housing agreement, only one agreement in 8 years. Only 3 units were built and sold to that low-income buyer. 3 units in 8 years. And that's because they didn't listen. Now, they created, in 2014, the housing chair of the council in Maui got together a task force, a working group. They all work together, the advocates, the developers, and the government people work together. And my understanding is they have at least nine housing agreements signed at this time. So, you know, there's the conclusions from the UHERO report. You guys have copies, or you have access to the UHERO report. Dr. Brubaker has testified a number of times. So we look forward to further working with the legislature and the economists and experienced home builders on affordable housing legislation. There are a few things that have worked, facilitating housing, and that's increased flexibility and authority and discretion for county housing directors. You know, we believe that the housing directors should have the authority to allow rental units to satisfy requirements in old permits that require affordable for sale. So instead of having to go back and change their permit, you know, there should be a law, we believe, that will allow them to substitute rentals for sale. Allowing in lieu fees. Allowing in lieu fees allows the counties and the state to collect funds that can be loaned to develop more housing. So we can talk further. Stanford could talk further why in lieu fees is actually a good thing. The other thing about in lieu fees is if there's a housing development, luxury housing development, and you require affordable units in that luxury housing development or condo, the CAM is about, what, $700? Next year will be $750, $800. In the next 5 years, it'll be $1,000 a month on that affordable unit, just on the CAM. So it's much wiser to take that money, take the in lieu fee, and put it towards affordable housing where the CAM is not that high. There are a number of incentives, and Act 54 was passed this year, and that was a bill that the unions worked on with a number of stakeholders. That we're really looking forward to Act 54 coming to fruition. Representative Johansson was the author of that bill. There are a number of bills that this past session that help renters and buyers, and in fact, the Special Action Team for Affordable Rentals is working on a rent-to-own program. We're looking at a rent-to-own program. So, those are the types of things, creative things that interest us. On home ownership, Act 123, there's a home buyer assistance bill that was passed, updating the down payment loan program, HHFDC's program. Act 166 by Chair Espero allows extended or Hanai members to act as co-mortgagors. And another bill by Senator Espero, Chair Espero, Act 159, authorizes nonprofit housing trusts like the Home Ownership Center. I think Dennis Oshiro's here today to purchase, I guess, units, affordable units that the city or the state, the counties or the state don't want to buy back. So that's a huge bill, and that can keep affordability in perpetuity or for a very long time. There are a number of bills to help Hawaiian homelands, housing. I'll just close with the opportunities, and the opportunities are public-private partnerships. So we look forward to working with the legislature on private-public partnerships. And a very interesting and a huge opportunity is the 21st century schools and housing projects. And I know HEPA was very deeply involved in that, as well as others, Act 155 in 2013. So there are a number of questions. There were a number of bills relating to the school impact fee, but this Act 155 and the 21st century schools, the whole purpose was to avert the need of higher, or so that we wouldn't need to raise school impact fees, because this Act 155, was supposed to make money so that you wouldn't have to raise impact fees. And the last opportunity is transit-oriented development. And I have a couple of pages on transit-oriented development. You folks can read it, but as you folks know from yesterday or Monday, it all hinges on the rail funding, right? So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Members, any questions for Mr. Arakawa? Very good handout, a lot of information. Thank you. All right, we will move on then if there are no questions. Although we did get through that, of course, government lands, need for infrastructure and cost, repealing the cap on the conveyance tax, P3s, yes, definitely. A lot of good suggestions. From EAH, Kevin Carney, Vice President. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you. Nonprofit developer. There's a seat in the back if you want to sit down. Is there a seat back there? Yeah, empty one? Yeah, there's a few over there if you'd like to sit down.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I do have a disclaimer, though, to put out first. If I happen to roll out of my chair and start rolling around on the ground, it's because as I was leaving my office to come here on the 28th floor, the fire alarm went off, and I had to walk down 28 floors to get here. So that's why, or one of the reasons I may be rolling around on the floor. I'm also a little bit nervous because I've got Craig sitting behind me here, and so I have to be careful what I say. I do have a couple of handouts that I put up there for the senators and representatives, and the extras are available for the community. There's probably about 25 extras up there. EAH Housing. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. and in April of next year, we'll be 50 years old. We only do affordable rental properties, primarily serving those at 60% of the area median income and below. And in our 50-year history, we have not sold a property. We will continue to refinance it over the years and rehabilitate it. And we've been in Hawaii now for going on 21 years. And we got here actually with the help of Senator Inouye. HUD had asked us if we were interested in expanding to Hawaii. We had been doing a lot of acquisition rehab work in California, Northern California in particular. And so the company said they were interested, and with the help of Senator Inouye, we were able to get a grant in the neighborhood of $51 million to purchase 2 properties here that were reaching the end of their affordability. One being Kukui Tower on the edge of Chinatown, and the other one being Kalani Gardens in Mililani. In addition to being developers and managers, we also have resident services programs in our properties. We have what we call resource coordinators on staff who actually bring the resources that are available in the community to the property. Most of our properties have community centers, and if they don't, then we connect our residents with those services. In the islands, we currently manage 17 properties on 3 islands for a total of 1,806 units. Of those 17 properties, we have ownership interest in 71% of them. Let me back up a little bit. The fact sheet talks a little bit more in detail. I won't read everything, but we are one of the largest nonprofits in the western United States with employees, 475 employees in 2 states. In Hawaii, we've got about 88 employees. Here, most of those are working on site, doing the management of our properties. Our development group consists of 4 people. We get support on the development side from our home office in California, where we have 12 project managers, as well as a senior vice president of development. Over the years, we've developed 95 properties, 7,728 units of various types, but all affordable. We've acquired 26 properties in California and Hawaii. Under active development right now, we have approximately $680 million in development projects, and we've developed over 1 billion properties. Our total management portfolio is a little over 9,000 units, with roughly 8,000 of them in Northern California. In Hawaii, we also manage for the city and county of Honolulu, 170 units and 2 properties for them. And we also manage 1 property for the county of Kauai, Paenao Village. We've expanded primarily here in Hawaii through preservation of properties that are reaching the end of their affordability period and then rehabilitating those properties. A quick list of those properties are Kalani Gardens in Mililani, Kukui Tower in Chinatown, Kukui Gardens on the edge of Chinatown, Kahului Town Terrace on Maui, Kahuku Elderly, and Hibiscus Hill. All of these properties primarily serve those at 60% and below of the area median income. There are a few that go up to 80% area median income, but that totals 1,104 units that we've preserved over the years. Projects that we recently completed, or the project we recently completed, is the Villages of Moaʻeku out in Ewa Villages, 192 units, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms, townhouse style development, with 60%, serving 60% and below of the area median income. In our development pipeline, I'm pleased to announce that we're breaking ground on Olaka'alima Art Space Lofts in Kaka'ako, which is 84 units with a preference for artists. We expect that property to be opening in January or February of 2019. All units serving those at 60% of the area median income and below. Hale Nohona, also in Kaka'ako, is a 111-unit micro-unit project. And we expect to be closing on the financing of that project in the spring of 2018. We're currently in a review process with DPP and the 201H process. Again, all units at 60% and below of the area median income. And then we're doing a refinance of the Kukui Tower project I mentioned previously. That's 380 units. That project is 41 years old. It needs some tender loving care, particularly on the interior of the units, and we hope to close that project, Craig, in the spring of 2018. And then finally, you may have read in the paper that EAH has been working with Salem Partners on a project that's being referred to as 1500 Kapiolani Boulevard, but it's actually the top of the Walgreens parking garage. We're proposing to build 68 affordable senior units. That project, we hope to be applying for tax credit financing next year. So how do we do what we do? You know, our rents are fixed by HUD, which limits the amount of debt that we can carry. We therefore need large amounts of government subsidies, including equity, grants, and loans, in order to build a project to serve the lower income levels. Essentially, we cannot pay for land. It just does not pencil for us because of our fixed rents. But long-term ground leases with a nominal rent are okay. Our biggest source of equity funding is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which was established in 1986 by the federal government. It's regulated under IRS Code for Section 42. And that program provides approximately 40% or more of our development costs covered by equity. The biggest source of the gap, and the gap is the difference between what the amount of debt is that the property can manage, in other words, rental income minus operating expenses, and the total development costs. The tax credit equity reduces that gap. And we're nonprofit, we don't need tax credits. So when we get those tax credits, we sell them to an investor, and that's how we get that equity. I want to thank the legislature regarding the state low-income housing tax credits by reducing the takedown period from 10 years to 5 years. So far, what we've seen, that has had a positive effect by increasing the amount that we can get per dollar. So that's a very good thing. Unfortunately, it came in an environment where the federal tax credits were getting reduced because of the speculation that the Trump administration was going to lower the corporate tax rate. That still hasn't happened. It's kind of stabilized a little bit, but we're still waiting to see what the final outcome may be. So as I said, Rental Housing Revolving Fund is our biggest source of gap financing. Other sources include home, CDBG, or the county affordable housing funds, if the county has an affordable housing fund. And Oahu does, and Maui does. And they each treat it differently. I like the way Maui treats their affordable housing fund. Expense reductions that we get for our properties, because we are serving these lower incomes, we do get a general excise tax exemption on rent and our development costs as well. Those are provided by the state. And by the county, we get real property tax exemptions and reductions and/or waivers of various fees through the 201H process. Now let me move to some of the issues we've had over the years and issues going forward. I want to read a quote to you. And I quote, "Hawaii's affordable housing problems have reached crisis proportions and will worsen unless all levels of government and the private sector work in partnership to implement bold and effective measures to address the housing needs of our residents," unquote. That quote comes from the January 2006 report of the Joint Legislative Housing and Homeless Task Force to the Hawaii State Legislature, roughly 11 years ago. and what have we accomplished. I think the situation has, based on my experience, gotten worse. We have more people applying every day. And we have some properties where the wait lists are just closed. There's no point in adding more people to the list because they're probably not going to get in for 2 years. And who knows where they're going to be in 2 years. All the projects I've mentioned have required major governmental assistance either at the federal, state, or county level, or in most cases, a combination of each. It's either we need free land or we need funding, or both. One of the biggest issues we've had since it was implemented is the cap on the $38 million cap on the conveyance tax, which funds the rental housing revolving fund. We've advocated to remove that cap, and will continue to advocate to remove that cap. The capital improvement infusions that are used to finance the rental housing revolving fund, which come once a year, they're okay, but they need to be larger. And I applaud you, Senator Sparrow, for putting forward that $2 billion funding bill, which we realized, was never going to get approved. But in our eyes, it was an eye-opener. It's really what is needed if we're going to address the gap in our housing issues. We need a huge amount of additional funding, and it needs to be consistent funding. As I said, the CIP infusions, they're okay. We'll take what we can get, I guess is my answer to that. But we would prefer a much more reliable funding source. More reliability equals less risk on our part, and we can plan further out if we know there's going to be money there. The low-income housing tax credit program, there's two levels. There's a 9% program and a 4% tax credit program, which is typically combined with Fannie Mae multifamily bonds and with rental housing revolving funds. The 9% round is typically 1 to 2 times a year. The 4% round is an open door policy. You can apply for 4% at any time. The problem is that, as you can imagine, a 4% tax credit is worth roughly half of what a 9% tax credit is worth, right? So you don't get the bigger bang for your dollar. So what you need is more gap financing. That brings us back to the rental housing revolving fund, and that's tied to the 9% application round, which is 1 to 2 times a year. So there's a gap in there of timing. If we could somehow solve that gap and speed up the process, that would help a great deal. Another buzzword that's been used lately over the last couple of years is permanent supportive housing. We are strong advocates of permanent supportive housing and would like to be part of the solution to that. And our city and county has brought in experts from the mainland, from Utah and from Seattle, to tell us how to do permanent supportive housing. We've known how to do permanent supportive housing. What it takes is project basing Section 8, not tenant vouchers of Section 8, but project basing of Section 8, so that we have that rent guarantee, if you will, which will help us underwrite the property combined with us applying for low-income housing tax credits. At the federal level, and this is, you can talk to our federal legislators about this issue, we need an up and out policy for households that no longer income qualify. In most of our projects, all of our projects, you have to income qualify to move in. If you win the lottery the following day, there's no provision for you to move out. There's nothing we can do to force you to move out. There needs to be some type of an income max and a timeline once they reach that max that they will be forced to move out, because we have income qualified people standing outside our door waiting in line to get in. And like I said, that's a federal issue, but would certainly help to solve a lot of the homeless problems that we have. At the county level, let me say that I disagree with David on in-lieu fees. We are opposed to in-lieu fees primarily because we don't see them being used. If the in-lieu fee was going to be used immediately to provide product, then okay, we'll be on board with that. But more than likely, it winds up in some type of an account at the city or county or wherever level, and it takes a long time for that money to be utilized. That concludes my presentation. Again, I want to thank you for being here, and we look forward to working with you and HHFDC to providing more affordable rental housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Members, any questions for Kevin? Looks like he's got a plate full for us.
Question.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation for more project-based Section 8 funding, what level of support do you think is needed to make it viable?
Well, in most cases, that's also a federal issue, to getting that money from the federal government. But it would help a great deal. I mean, but again, it's all comes down to the federal budget and what they allocate either to the state or to the counties in that regard. So I realize that's a very tough issue to do, and there's got to be a balance between tenant vouchers and project basing. The philosophy being you don't want to centralize all the project basing of vouchers. You want the tenants to be able to take them and go wherever they want to go, to give them more choices and that type of thing.
Are you, as far as what the state can do in that regard, would you say a state project-based rental assistance
Well, they're
program would be?
yes, but they're doing that with Mayor Wright, right? They're providing 364 project-based vouchers to match 1-for-1 of the existing units there. But if they could quadruple that number for other projects and put it out for requests for proposals, that would help a great deal. That would put less pressure on the Rental Housing Revolving Fund and other state resources. You're welcome.
Members, any further questions? You mentioned your opposition to the in lieu fees, which are primarily controlled by the county, is that correct?
Yes.
Is
I believe so.
there's no, time limit on when those should be spent, right? I think I remember an article or news story about funds that are not being spent on a timely manner, but there is no time
Correct.
factor involved in those.
Correct. I think if there is going to be in lieu fees at the county level, then one of my suggestions would be to give it to HHFDC, designated for the Rental Housing Revolving Fund to be used only on Oahu.
I like that idea.
If it's coming,
that's a good idea.
if it's Oahu money or whatever county it's coming from, because they have the expertise, they've already got the process and everything else. Craig may not want more work, but but it just makes sense. Why put the pressure on the county to maybe hire more staff, create another division, department, whatever, in order to administer those fees? The point being, we need product today, not 10 years from now.
And we did last session pass a resolution asking the county and the state to collaborate and work together more on. So
Yes,
this would be
yes.
one way to do that.
Yeah, the other suggestion we've made at council meetings is on Oahu in particular, there's an affordable housing fund that's paid, that's funded through our real property taxes. And we advocated to create that fund, but our thinking at the time was, okay, here's going to be another source of gap financing for us. There'll be an RFP process of some sort, and we'll compete for that money. Well, that's never happened on Oahu, right? So the county controls that money and basically uses it wherever they want to use it. That's another case where they could give it to Craig and his staff, and they put it to use much faster, and it wouldn't cost, the expense of hiring more bodies or creating another division.
How much goes into that fund, do you know, on an annual basis?
I'm guessing somewhere between $4 to $5 million a year. I think Harrison's here, he may know.
4 to 5 million, Harrison? Okay. Thank you, Kevin. If there are no further questions, members, thank you. We will move on to our next presenter. Giovanni Molla. Come, welcome. Vice President of Coastal Rim Properties. One of our younger developers, working with his father, I know, and they've done quite a bit. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members of the subcommittee. My name is Giovanni Molla, and I'm a Vice President at Coastal Rim Properties. Coastal Rim Properties is a family-run real estate development firm owned by my father, Franco Molla. Our first development in the state of Hawaii was Village 4 of Kapolei, Kekuilani. The Kekuilani Village project consisted of 609 homes and a few hundred apartments built for local working families. And this was in the early 1990s. In the mid-1990s, we developed Kalanahali, a 176-unit affordable senior rental building on the corner of South Beretania and Kawakawa. Kalanahali was Hawaii's first privately owned low-income housing tax credit project. In 2013, we decided to purchase 3 properties throughout Honolulu to develop affordable high-rise projects on. Our project in Kaka'ako, 803 Waimanu, located next to Imperial Plaza and BMW, is a 153-unit, 7-story affordable condominium project. All but a few units are available for those making between 80 and 140% of the area median income. We have DERF financing through the HHFDC on the project for around $11 million, and we're about to proceed with the HHFDC lottery sale process on that project. Our other project in Moilili is 929 Pumehana. We have 180 units there, 21 stories. It will be a condo project. It will be, well, 60% of the units will be for those making between 120 and 80% of the area median income. We're currently awaiting HHFDC approval, or we're filing those papers to begin the lottery sale process for the project. There's also DERF financing on that project through the HHFDC for approximately $14 million. In Kapolei, located on Wakea Street across from Island Pacific Academy on a 3-acre block, we have a mixed-use project consisting of 2 affordable senior rental towers. The towers are 150 feet tall and will have 300 residential units there. The units will be available for seniors making between 30 and 60% of the area median income. This project is made possible by state and federal tax credits, DERF financing, and tax-exempt bonds. The groundbreakings for all 3 of these projects should happen in Q4 this year and early 2018. They're all fully entitled and have been, we've gotten all the necessary financing for them in place. All 3 right now, we're finishing up working drawings at the building department and should be receiving our permits in the next few months. Looking forward, we're in the process of buying 1 or 2 sites in downtown Honolulu to do a non-subsidized rental high-rise for those making between 80 and 120% of their area median income. I'll get to that. We'd like to do a non-subsidized project as the numbers work for us, and our biggest risk right now is just the political climate with that area especially. On these properties, we'll be using a multi-year escrow or doing a joint venture with the landowner so we can minimize risk on the entitlement side. That is our biggest risk for any of our projects. We shouldn't have to worry about political opposition when we want to build an affordable housing project in Honolulu, but that is our #1 worry. We typically spend millions of dollars on pre-development costs, forgetting the property costs, which alone cost $5 to $10 million typically for a site that we like. We spend millions of dollars before even attaining entitlements, and we've lost a lot not attaining entitlements. So we really need to be careful of what we go into when we look at something. What the state can do to make it easier for us to build affordable housing, one thing would be remove the environmental impact statement needed to apply for a 201H or 201G zoning exemption through the HHFDC. An EIS, an environmental impact statement, is needed for projects when using state or federal money. But like with this downtown project we'd like to do for like workforce rental, we're not using federal money. We wouldn't want to use state money, but it'll still be affordable. And we do need an environmental impact statement, though, for that, for doing that. This is highly unnecessary and is a major waste of time and money for us, as it's one of the requirements for doing an affordable project if you're using subsidy, and we do not want to do that. So that is one thing, the EIS, take a look at that. Aside from removing that, the main issue is just zoning. We'd like to build affordable without having to go through the pricey and lengthy entitlement process. If two people own land next to each other with the same size zoning, height limit, size of lot, if both of them propose affordable housing projects on their property, each one might get a different result depending on their political connections and their savvy with the council members or their area senator. I think we should get away from that, as with even with the TOD process and these new zoning ways, you still have to be political. You don't know what you're going to exactly get, even if you buy a TOD site. What we should do is have these papers. We should tie.
I think we have them, but if anyone in the audience wants an extra one, and we can make copies if you don't get one.
I'll take the remove the EIS paper.
What's it think? Go ahead.
So what we'd like the state or our city and county to do is take affordability and tie it to zoning. On this, on the top of the page, there's the black and white. That is taken from the zoning code on how you calculate your FAR, or your density, on a property in a BMX zone district. So as you can see, the BMX 4, you can build a 4 FAR. So if you have 10,000 square feet, you can build 40,000 square feet of space. As you see on the open space bonus, max FAR, though, is 7.5. So you could technically double your FAR by having open space. What we think you should do, or what the city and county should do, or work with the state to do this, is tie affordability to something like this and make a matrix so we can have something that looks like the green below, where if you do, say, 100%, 60%, you do all 60% affordability for the AMI in your building, you get an automatic 3 times your FAR, you get 1.5 times your height limit, and you get automatic exemptions. This is kind of what the city's looking at doing with their Bill 58 and 59, but even with that, you still have to go through entitlement process. This would make it so, just like as on the existing open space bonus matrix, you can, depending on how much affordability you want to do, or how much open space in that case you want to do, you can increase your benefits of building affordable housing. Do you have any questions about that? Do you understand what?
Move on.
Anyway, this would.
We could ask some questions
yeah, sure.
offline if we need to.
This
but,
would remove the entitlement process and make it a little bit easier for not all projects, but you could do much more without even getting entitlements, and you just go straight to the building department and get your permit.
You're just talking about streamlining that process.
Streamlining
and becoming more
affordability, yeah.
efficient in the approval and decision-making, basically.
Well, it would remove approval. You don't have to get approval to get an open space bonus. If we could tie the affordability of your property, if you decided to do that, to your density or height or other things that would be in a chart, that would remove the entitlement process, and you could go straight to building.
Which
project.
provides efficiency and quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. So making that happen would make building affordable housing the easiest thing in the world for us, and reduce time from 5 years to 1 year just to get entitlement, so, or
Well, you-
not to even be entitled
Your
to build.
company has been doing a lot. You have built hundreds of, and what you have to say is important, and I'm hoping that people in here are listening, and we might be able to work with it and see how we can, because we are in a crisis in terms of the need for housing. Okay. Are you finished, or is there some more?
That's all we had, really.
Okay.
That's our idea. So.
Members, any questions? Rep,
Maybe
Chair,
more of a
Vice Chair?
comment. Maybe more of a comment. I think
Okay.
this is it's an interesting,
Sure.
concept and matrix, but I think, this is impacting the county, city and county's land use ordinance.
Yes, and
So
that's
that's
what I
where
was.
the change
yeah.
would have to take place with the
I
city council, I
understand, yeah.
guess. But it's it's an interesting concept, yeah.
And some of our city partners are here, and we're thankful for being here, and like I said, hopefully there might be room to have that discussion continue if it's worthy of it. Now, you mentioned basically NIMBY, without saying NIMBY.
Yeah,
You-
yeah.
You said
yeah.
NIMBY. When it comes to affordable housing projects, what type of NIMBY are you talking about?
Well, for example, on our 803 Waimanu project, we tried to do I think a 250-foot building there, and the neighbors, Imperial Plaza, heavily opposed that, as they said we were blocking their views.
Review, okay.
And when we fixed the building, though, to remove most of the view issue, they still opposed it due to just not wanting a project next door. So,
And did that project
well,
get approved?
what we ended up having to do is just kind of build the code, and we couldn't get any entitlements on it. And that's why it's only a 7-story building versus our other ones, which are 21 stories and 13 stories.
So
Yeah,
in that case, you wanted to build more units and you just weren't able to?
we tried 3 times to go through the HCDA to do that, and they wouldn't let us, so we had to deal with it.
Thank you. Any further questions? Chair?
Well, regarding the environmental impact statement, I mean, it's almost like you want to undo all the work of the millennials before you have created with these new laws, which I think is refreshing to some extent. But tell me what your experience has been, or your perception of these environmental laws.
Well, it's, I don't think we should get rid of that for
Understand.
the federal and state money projects. But if we're building a luxury project on the property, we do not need a EIS. So if I want to build an affordable project without the subsidies, then I think you can change that on a state level of removing that need to do so. Because if you are doing a subsidies project, you have to do it anyway under federal guidelines. Not many people want to build a affordable but non-subsidized project here, but we have penned it out and it works really well. So that's why we would like to remove the EIS.
That's
Yeah.
important to know. It sounds like your project in Kakako, it's like the only one I know that hasn't been able to build as high
Yeah.
as it wanted to. And, okay, well, David, I'll work on that with you then, remove the EIS, okay. Or water it down to some extent, if appropriate.
Well, thank you for your presentation, and we hope you'll continue to build more units for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck to
Yeah,
you.
and don't be a stranger, you should come here more often.
I'll visit you.
We're getting them involved now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni. Okay, moving along, and we're doing well on time. Thank you. Oh, next, Christine Camp, President and CEO of Avalon Group. Welcome, Christine. Been doing a lot as well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Aloha. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I have a little PowerPoint presentation for
Okay.
pictures.
We're going to be facing you.
Okay, so I echo all the sentiments that have been discussed so far. And, but I'm of the opinion that we do need in lieu fees, so sorry, Kevin. I think that, and I'll tell you why. In lieu fees can be very, very powerful for purposes of funding. A lot of times, affordable housing, when you're looking for tax credits, and Hawaii only has a limited number of people, and the tax credits are doled out based on population, not based on need. And so we need that extra cash. So if the in lieu fees can be made available, it will have significant impacts.
Excuse us, we've got a temperamental machine here.
I appreciate the PowerPoint. It was done for Building Industry Association, so I was hoping to pull out some of the other things in the last minute. But when I talk about projects and development, it's as much as about design and community building as it is about financing and raising money for the need. And it is so difficult to find financing for affordable housing, especially if you can't find the tax credits. So if you don't have the tax credits because it's not available, it's highly competitive, what do? I hope there are two things that the state can do. One is lift that cap to the Rental Housing Trust Fund. If you're collecting the conveyance tax, why wouldn't it be available? And the conveyance tax, again, is from people who are buying housing, right, and real estate. So it's generated from real estate activity. It should be given back for the needs of the real estate community. And I think for now, we're in a crisis, like you stated, and we absolutely need every dollar you can. So please lift that cap. That Rental Housing Trust Fund goes a long way. And it's because it's used for equity. So you can borrow as much as you can, but you can't do anything if you don't have the equity. And that equity funding comes from the trust fund, the tax credits, and in lieu fees, if it's available. And as to the mechanics of who controls it, I think we just have to go with what is the most efficient and where there's staffing. And if the state has staffing, it should go to the state. If the city has the staffing, it should go there. But regardless, we really need the funding. Thank you for this. And this is just a picture of what we've built. So this is 7,000 Hawaii Kai. This is what we're planning to build along Kapiolani, where we just bought property. But, sorry, I'm so technically challenged. Okay, so just a little background about Avalon, just so that you know that we're commercial developers, but we also manage residential units. We will have over 900 units of management. Majority of them are for people who are making 140% or less. It's not mandated by zoning, it's just the market, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And we're currently planning about 800 units in town by Nuuanu, along Kapolei, if the community wants it, because right now there are a community who don't want more residential in the area until jobs are created, and we are trying to build. Exactly. And I don't think they're opposed to affordable housing, as they're, they want more jobs. It's traffic. It's about quality of life. And then we have, our Kenrock building. And currently we have active 5 projects, of which 3 are residential, and they are primarily rental properties. So just pictures of things that we've done so far in residential. This was done by, this was presented to you last year, I think, when Stanford Carr came to speak to the group. And I borrowed this slide from him. This is the 60% AMI, where the production has been, and this is where 140% of AMIs. You see here, so there's a lot going on at 30%, 50%, 60% of AMI. Why? Because there's tax credits available. But once you get to the 80% of AMI, it's affordable, yeah, but there's no tax credits available. Even the Rental Housing Trust Fund doesn't have anything for anything below 60%. So if you want to develop from 80% to 140%, so this is market housing, right? So this is all in that gap. We really need to understand what's going on. Why aren't people building at this level? And I'm going to share with you my numbers today as to why people are not doing it and why we want your help. Okay, so this is just about Kenrock. We bought this in February, but you've seen us very, very quiet. Why? If we invested such a great amount of money for this property, why aren't we doing this along the TOD? Because we can't pencil it right now. And there's a lot of noise about affordable housing requirements. Is it a yes? Is it a no? Is it 30%? Is it 10%? Is it 30 years or 10 years? We're not sure. There's no level of certainty. And I think the Mola family was right. If you can give certainty a lot of investments will follow because you know what the rules of the games are. But every project requires negotiation, an entitlement process, and it takes. I'm telling all our investors, we're lucky if we get it in 12 months of entitlement. That's before you can submit for building permits. But let's expect 24 months. We shouldn't have to do that, but that's what's happening. And these are for urban areas that are already developed. So I want to talk about the Hawaii Kai experience, and these are numbers I'm sharing with you to just really put some reality back into this. So cost per unit, $582,000. This is with the owner discounting their land value by $20 million of what they actually spent on the land over the years. The cost before land is about $452,000. So let's say that we're not developing in Hawaii Kai, we're developing anywhere. Concrete, tilt up, brand new, with all of the new codes. Oh, this has sprinklers, by the way. But all of the requirements of it. Cost before parking. The community was so concerned about us taking up parking space in the area, we overparked, right? So we put a little over 2 stalls per unit. It cost us $36,000 a stall. And that's with us being very efficient. I understand that other places it's $50,000 a stall. Cost of time and processing, this is what I want to talk about. Just in the short time that I was involved in this project, this has got a project, you know, it's 4 times around before it finally got built. I was the 4th developer coming in. Our interest expense is $86,000 for that 3-year duration. Per unit, $19,000 for the entitlement and processing. Just the cost of doing environmental issues, traffic issues, the studies that all the communities want us to do, that whatever it may be, it wasn't related to building. It was related to the entitlement process. So let's talk about the capital stack, because this is where I feel the in lieu fee and all of your, you know, where equity could help, where Senator Espero, big thinking, the $2 billion, we would have been happy with $500 million if we could have gotten it to fund projects like this. So let's talk about capital stack. During development, we were able to get, well, equity stayed at 32% of the total project. The mezzanine, the gap between what the first mortgage was able to give us versus what the gap was, we were short on money. We had to borrow what they call the mezzanine equity. This is where the state can really do a lot of help. Look at what the required return is on that. That's 15% a year. First mortgage, 3.75, but who can do a project with just 45% of the cost? Even with the equity coming in at 32%. This is, if you're buying a house, 32%, you know, would be $32,000 a unit for $100,000, right? So just think of that math, it's huge. So take out capital, meaning once you build it, then you have to go in and get a new set of lenders, to what we call the permanent financing for 10 years or a 30-year mortgage if it's available. So we were able to get a short-term financing, which was cheaper than a 10-year mortgage, at 4.13%. And our mezzanine is again 15%, because that's the risk. Then we left our equity at 32%. Oops. So I just want to share with you this number. Almost over $100,000 was due to the cost of time and uncertainty that needed to be clarified. We could save a lot of that. That's $105,000 on our project only. So we're looking at that and extrapolating it to future projects, and we think the cost is about right. I'm giving you some real details by market product type, and we have affordable units. So we provided 20% of the affordable units out of the 269 units. Now the property, we could have built 500 units, but we're limited because of entitlement process and what the neighbors didn't want. So we stayed with what we were able to do. We provided 54 units, or 20% of the units, at affordable 80% or below. The rest were market. Now look at the numbers here, monthly, right? This is the income that we're getting from these categories of units. The 2-bedroom, 2-bath market, we have a wait list. Anything under $2,500, we have a wait list. And we're losing money for every unit that we're renting. Where we thought we were going to make money for the 4 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, we have availability. No one's renting because they can't afford it. The people can't afford, who are renters, can't afford $3,800 or $3,600. So we reduced the price to $3,434. Some are $33, some are $31. This is the average. we have availability. So it's not full, so we're losing money on those vacant units. And our pro forma was we're going to make money so that we make 2% on our equity, the 32% of equity, which comes out to about $50 million. But right now, we're making 0.64%. So you wonder why people are not building rental housing? This is why. This is why. But we're still willing to try. And for me, it's very meaningful. So we start to look at costs. Maybe we can do better costs, better mixes, so that we can subsidize the affordability. Maybe we can do things like maybe the affordable units shouldn't have all of the amenities that we put into this project. Because what David said, CAM, right? Common area maintenance. The maintenance fee of those common areas. Maybe if we build the affordable units not as part of this market project, but separated, then the operating costs wouldn't be as high. So we wouldn't be losing as much money. We're looking at those aspects. So our new designs are reflecting that. So in Kapiolani Boulevard, we have affordable units lining the parking garage and a tower. But we're having some significant challenges because Harrison, I see him, the Harrison from the city's here. There's a whole lot of noise about what the city wants, what the council wants. Someone is coming in saying they want 30% of affordable units before you can build anything. The city has their different ideas. What I'm finding is it's very hard to figure out what we're trying to build. All we wanted was, before when we bought the property, was we wanted certainty. Can you assure us before we made this investment that we have certainty in what we should be building? We thought we had it, we closed, but the political noise came up, right? Everybody wanted affordable housing. This was a crisis. And all of a sudden, a council member thought it would be great to put 30% requirement for 30 years on all of these units. Now, it might be okay for rental housing to do 30-year commitments, but for doing it for sale housing, it's a death of a project. So it's really, you need to define, and we're still working through that. And hopefully, we're successful in making sure people understand. But whether it's 30% or 10%, politically it sounds so great to say, you know what, I delivered for you for that project 30% of affordability. And guess what? That project gets never built because we can't raise the money. So we need your help. I would like to make this rental housing. So when the Mola family said, we don't want 201H to have environmental impact statements when they're not taking any funding, I know what he means. Because to do an environmental impact statement, that $19,000 per unit might come out to $30,000 a unit. Because it takes that many consultants to evaluate and address everyone's concerns that comes out of that environmental impact statement. Second, and whether justified or not, we still have to address them. Second, it's if you're not taking funding, so it's one thing if you're taking the tax credit funding or if you're taking the rental housing trust fund, your state laws require that an environmental impact statement be done. But if you're not taking those tax credit monies that are available, but we're asking for expedited processing. The 201H is an interesting thing. A lot of developers actually want to go through the 201H process versus staying with the city process. Why? Because that process it has some benefits. It's the perspective. When city gives you a zoning or permit, they feel that they're giving you something. Instead of saying, this is part of our community, we build something, they feel that they're giving you the right to build in your city. And no wonder we have an affordable housing challenge. Present companies here, I respect them all, but I'm just looking at the perspectives. So let's look at the perspectives. When the law was written for 201H, it's really as if you're building affordable housing, we're going to grant you all of these waivers. The perspective is you're delivering something that the community needs. And therefore, we're giving you something. So the Act 54 that you just passed, and thank you very much, with the support of the unions, it allows for rental housing to be built. We're waiting for the city laws to catch up to that. But what it does is it's a perspective change. And that change is you're providing affordable housing. The union is going to do their share. As long as you use union labor, we're going to give you 20% of our cost, or whatever it may be. There's a cost reduction component to it. And in exchange, the state is going to allow expedited processing. That process can help us because interest costs, right? $100,000 in interest costs. If we can build it half the amount of time, that's $50,000 a unit if you're just talking averages. It's pretty significant. So on one hand, let's look at the perspective of affordable housing, we're at a crisis. If we can all agree that we're at a crisis, then we have to look at affordable housing. Now, we know that there's federal funding available for those below 60%. What happens to those at 80 to 140%? They still need help too. Not every one of those people can buy homes. They need a pathway up. They need to be able to be in a unit that is rent capped. But I don't propose rent controls. Again, you have to look at it in a perspective of what can we do to entice more supply. And the reason why I asked for rental housing support is that you know that those people who are speculating with the for sale housing, it's because they think they can rent it, because there's just not enough rental housing available. They're not going to live there. They're renting it. You want to nip that in the bud. You want to build more rental housing and glut that around the city or the state. So I can tell you in Hawaii Kai for sure, when our 269 units came on the market, if you look at the average rents, they actually went down because they were older stock of condominium units that are now facing brand new for rental, 269 of them all at once. It had an impact to that marketplace. Now, a lot of them may not like me for doing that. A lot of realtors are saying, why don't you just make that a condominium? No, we have a need, and we want to keep it as a rental housing. The market, but if you notice, we reduced the price in the areas that we had vacancies. Rental housing is not only accessible, it's flexible. It goes up and down based on supply and demand, and it resets every month. So we'd like you to take a look at it from the perspective that rental housing is going to help you abate that appetite for that one-off investor who's buying that unit that could have been sold to a real resident. And the only way to do that is support rental housing. So that's my view, because I'm building rental housing. I'm also building affordable housing as well for sale. And that's a different story. That perspective of having 30-year requirements, I ask you to not consider that, because when people buy, they want to build equity. And that incentive for equity should be there for people who are sacrificing to clean up their credit, save up their down payment, and pay their mortgages. So 30 years, I don't think is one that should be considered. I think you should be considering more ways to help fund the mezzanine. So that maybe if the state has a mezzanine fund, maybe it's the in lieu fees that you have. Maybe you won't be requiring 15%. Maybe you'd be requiring 5%, but it's a revolver. It's a way to increase that base. So I'd like you to consider those areas where you're expediting process, whether you're eliminating EIS or EA or expediting that process, giving a time limit. And if you can come up with funding mechanisms that can support the gaps. I appreciate your opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Ms. Camp? Vice Chair?
I share your concern about the lack of funding for projects between 80 to 120%.
140%, yes.
And, because so much of our funding is available and focused on 60% and below AMI, what source of funds do you feel, what kind of funding do you feel is needed, and how should that be structured?
So I think you already have a mechanism for collecting the the conveyance taxes, where you have it set aside for rental housing trust fund, but you cap it to $38 million a year.
Right.
I'd like you to consider taking the cap off. And if we said that we're in a crisis point for affordable housing, currently the rental housing trust fund is taking only a portion of the conveyance tax collection. The other goes into trust fund for public lands, or natural lands, natural resources. Maybe you might take a holiday on that side in favor of having housing built. So, again, I'm not asking for handouts. It's about revolving funds. It's going to be paid back, so that the fund is always there. But given that the payback period is depending on the development period, you have to make sure that there's funding that's sufficiently available every year. So it's maybe raising it through bond issuances. Maybe the cities can participate or counties can participate to increase their bond issuance and have it through an agency that already knows how to, make that available to developers. But that funding mechanism is one of the reasons why we have to build market housing or for sale housing, because the cost of funds are so expensive.
So, I think that's the recurring theme for everyone
Right.
so far is the removing the cap to make funds available. for-
Absolutely, because
for
it's
more
available. And then the in lieu fee, I mean, so if we needed 30% equity, right? And it's a project that's 80% to 140%, that in lieu fee can support that. For every dollar you need, the in lieu fee, or let's just look at it this way, for every $4 of in lieu fee that you have, you can build a $10 project, right? So it's a way to make it exponential when you have that available.
But the in lieu fees are controlled by the city or the county that is collecting it for whatever zoning permit that they approved. So from the state's perspective, what do you suggest?
So my suggestion is to, if there's an agency that already has the expertise of working on those funds, if it's a state agency, maybe it's through state law that says you have to use it by a certain time or provide it to the state to administer. But I believe that in lieu fee can be very powerful.
And do we know what the balance of in lieu fees are in the various counties? Does anybody have that data?
Sure.
Right. Thank you.
And I think when you mentioned you disagree with Kevin, I think his point, though, is what we're told or what we think is going on is the in lieu fees are sitting in a fund and they're not being spent. And then when they're not being spent,
Right.
obviously, one questions why or when will it be spent?
Right. It's very.
could have agreed with me and said it should be spent.
Right.
So I want to just clarify, because to me, for when as a development, I said, the most important part about the development, once you have the vision and the location identified, is about fundraising. And that in lieu fee, if it was available for an affordable housing project, I should be able to apply for it if it's in the same district that the in lieu fee was paid for. I mean, we don't want an in lieu fee from Waianae or Kapolei being used in Kapiolani or in Waianae. You want it in the areas that it's been paid for. So I think I agree with that because that's where the need is. But if it's related to timing of how fast it goes up, the more powerful the funding is when you aggregate, when you have more of money available.
Which agency controls the in lieu fees? Can someone shout that out?
Speak partially for a while. We have a proposal in front of council to allow an in lieu fee as part of Bill 58 affordable housing requirement. That has not yet been passed, so we're not collecting those. There is a prior option under the rezoning and unilateral agreements, but that really people have not been paying in lieu fees. So that really.
Do you have an in lieu fee fund right now, though?
Yes, yeah.
And how much is in that? Are you able to say?
About a couple million.
So maybe that's where we need the mayor and the governor to have a conversation or an MOU, or whatever the case may be, but
Right.
there's some possibilities, I guess, from what we're hearing. Any further questions or?
So
Statement?
Maui County?
Yes.
So our in lieu fee is the difference in the three-bedroom home price for 160% AMI and 100% AMI. It equates to about $240,100. And we have not had one developer contribute to these.
because it's so high, right, it's prohibitive.
How much is it?
But it would go into our affordable housing fund that we administer.
240, you said,
$245,100
per unit?
per unit.
Wow.
So I think Maui has the most difficult environment, if I may say so.
Yeah,
It is, I mean,
you do.
it's one of those areas that we avoid because, I'm sorry, because it's so difficult. You're almost telling every developer not to come and develop in your county.
I'd love for you to have you come to Maui and speak. for a
I think that is the message they are sending at this
And
point.
that is so, and that's so, well, let's talk about, may I just add one more if you
Sure,
don't,
sure.
since I'm here and I'm speaking in front of everyone. You know, we talk about inclusionary zoning where you need to have affordable housing in every project, but no one talks about exclusionary zoning. You know, along East Honolulu, affordable housing is so needed, but you still have areas where the zoning is 20,000 square feet minimum lot size. And in Mililani, you have lots that are 25,000 square feet. So why is it that Waikahala area needs 20,000 square feet for each house, when Mililani, you can get along and have a great community at 5,000 square foot average minimum lot size? These are what I call exclusionary zoning policies. That's what causes housing prices to go up. And we should be looking at that just as much as inclusionary zoning policies.
So basically, the rich areas versus the not-so-rich areas?
If you want to see political opposition, try and change that law.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we do it to ourselves. So right now, what I'm asking you is what is doable, and doable is funding and expedited processing, because you can cut costs in those ways and deliver more home, and we can call it a crisis. And if we call it a crisis, maybe it's just sunsetted at a certain point. You get to do it faster. Permits are going to be available to you much faster, but you have to do it in the next 5 years, and it expires and it goes back to the way it's been.
Right.
See how developers react to that. I know that for sure that if that's available to me, I'll be acting much quicker to do what I needed to do. So I think, but it has to have incentives attached to it. There's got to be incentives attached to it.
And you mentioned, though, in closing, that your Kapulani project, because of the uncertainty, you really don't have any timeline on when that might get developed or begin.
Right. We bought the property in February. Presumably, right now, we should be submitting for building permits. We've put a stop to it. How do you underwrite something as far as between 10% and 30%? You just can't. How do you underwrite for something that requires 10 years or 30 years? You just can't underwrite.
And a risk is if interest rates go up,
Right.
your costs will go up in the future, and that in turn will hurt the residents who need that housing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
presentation. Okay, moving on. We have the Michaels Development Company. Elizabeth? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Senators, House of Representatives, and committee members and guests. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this joint informational briefing and to submit testimony. My name is Liz Char. I'm a development officer with Michaels Development Company. Ms. Karen Seddon could not be here today. She had a conflict, so I'm here in her stead. We submitted written testimony and provided some attachments to the committee for your information. So I won't be reading it as I appear to be the caboose. I'll make this short, and it's lunchtime. Michaels Development Company is one of the largest affordable housing developers in the nation. We've overseen over $305 billion in development and substantial rehabilitation, which resulted in over 52,000 units in 376 communities since 1973. That was before I was born. So. There are 50,500 units under management. We are serving 115,000 residents nationally, including the towers at Kuhio Park and Kalihi, which is comprised of 555 affordable units. We have 2 more communities that will be added in December 2017 with the completion of the 85-unit Le'ohana and the 85-unit Le Kupuna, which is obviously for family and for seniors in Kailua Kona. In addition to that, we have in development Keahumoa Place, which is a 320-unit family affordable rental project in Evakapule area to be developed in 4 phases, serving households at or 100% AMI and below. 80% of those units will be for households that are making the 80% in AMI below income. We have phase 1, 2, and 3, which will deliver 239 units, received funding this year from HHFTC, so thank you very much for that. And we are scheduled to close financing in first quarter of 2018 and start construction in second quarter of 2018. The anticipated completion date for the projects, phase 1, 2, and 3, are roughly fourth quarter 2019 to first quarter 2020. We were also selected as the developer for Halevai Olu Senior Rental, which is a 150-unit affordable senior rental project planned for in Chinatown to be developed on city-owned land. The project is currently undergoing city and SHPD review, as the existing Gilliland building built in the 50s was deemed historic. So, yes, I know. It has some historic elements that are deemed significant. So we'll be going through that process. We are also working with HPHA on Kuhio Park's Homes Phase 2, which is approximately 469 units planned for development and redevelopment on property that is owned by the state. All of these affordable rental projects are really made possible due to the public-private partnerships between the various government agencies and Michael's Development Company. So what makes all these projects possible is three things. So land availability. The aforementioned projects are being developed on city or state-owned land with long-term ground leases, which helps to keep the affordable housing development costs down in areas where land is scarce and expensive, which is Hawaii. Ownership of the projects are going to be reverting back to the fee owners, which is the government agencies, at the end of the lease period. But land availability is key to developing affordable housing. Additional funding, this is a echo of everything that everyone said up until this point. Increased availability of tax credits, GE exemptions, property tax exemptions, low interest loans such as the revolving fund and DARF, and the city's affordable housing fund, and potentially access to in-lieu fees, all contribute to making affordable housing financially feasible by helping to provide financing and also lowering the carrying cost of the project's development cost. The third thing is improved regulatory environment related to affordable housing. While processes such as the 201H exemption exist to allow counties to provide exemptions related to fees and zoning for affordable housing, the 2016 Hawaii Housing Planning Study conducted by SMS for HHFTC notes that Hawaii has one of the most highly regulated, it's one of the most highly regulated states in the nation. Such government regulations serve as one of the major impediments to production of housing in general and to affordable housing especially. The cost to work through the regulatory environment directly impacts the price of housing. So it's not only the cost to generate the EA, but also the time that's needed to go through the process to generate the actual applications for 201H and for the EA. And then to go through the approval process, it just adds time to the development process, and there's carrying costs associated with that. So if regulations were assessed and changed or modified to shorten the development process, the reduced timeline will reduce the development costs and reduce the overall cost of housing in Hawaii. So we hope that with the housing shortage at a crisis point, we appreciate the Housing Committee's efforts, and we look forward to working more closely with you and everybody in this room in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Ms. Char?
Can you give an update on KPT?
Oh, okay. We had a meeting with HPHA, and we are waiting for a program to be finalized so we can proceed with the EIS. Kuhio Park Homes. Kuhio Park Homes. And I also sent a link to a short bit from one of the news stations that came down to our towers at Kuhio Park, where one of the local insurance companies had an event to distribute school supplies to the students that reside in the building. And we had, I think, they were able to provide supplies for about 150 to 200 students, and it was still short, so they said next year they'll bring more, which is really nice.
So total, how many units have your company built in Hawaii? The total?
Total planned is about 1,000. And we're looking to deliver 160 this year and 240 within the next 2 years.
And for you, for your company, are finances a problem? Is financing
I
an
think,
issue?
Financing is a challenge for anyone that's doing affordable housing development. We go after the same pot of money Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. That's just the reality of life. If there was more funding, we think that there's enough capacity or there's enough demand for affordable housing in the state or even in Honolulu for every affordable housing developer to be very busy for a long time.
And you think we could have 20, 30, 50 projects being developed simultaneously at once? Not all you, but
That'd be nice, but
statewide?
you know, I think that would take quite a bit of resources, not just financially, but also on the labor side. It depends on the scale of the project, but going back to your proposal of floating a $2 billion bond, the thought was very appreciated. I think it brought a lot of attention to affordable housing in general, which we appreciate.
Any further final questions? Okay, thank you. And
Thank you.
finally on our list, we have Reverend Bob Nakata, former colleague of the legislature and a strong advocate for affordable housing and rentals, representing FACE and others. Welcome. Your cleanup, sir.
I'm not sure whether you're setting me up or...
We need some religion now.
Well, let me do this as a caveat. I was surprised to be asked when I walked in to speak, so I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage. But at a disadvantage, I realize from listening to the discussion so far, it's something I have felt for a while. But those of us who are advocates for affordable housing tend to be people like me, pastors, social workers, people like that. So our understanding of the financing side of this is nowhere near as deep as professionals in the arena of affordable housing. So what became clearer to me as I sat here is that because we don't have that kind of knowledge from which to articulate things, this whole thing about political will that has been talked about comes into play in a greater sense. We agree about the rental housing trust fund of the city. Maybe it should be turned over to HHFDC. They have more experience and knowledge in working in this arena than the city does. So part of the dynamic that develops at the city level and for us who are advocates is we look at in Kaka'ako, unfortunately, is the best example to use right now. When you have units being sold for $1, $2, several $1 million apiece, why can't we have a higher rate on the conveyance tax on those? Because it appears that those are people who have the money to put into those things, and the developers who develop these things are financially much better equipped to come into this arena and present their case. And we feel we don't have that. And so the counter then is to build up the political forces of low-income people who have very little in the way of voices to speak for them and voices that have the expertise. So this is my own pop analysis. We tend to become political obstructionists in order to be heard. Again, pop analysis, but also here's how it plays out. At this point, I am being accused of helping people with money to make more money. That's the kind of dynamic that goes on. So maybe one of the things that'll be helpful here is if the city is willing to turn over the in lieu fees to HHFDC, who has maybe more sophistication in dealing between the different parties. And let me, since you're giving me this opportunity, let me go into what we ran into at this session of the legislature. Last year, when the governor made pretty big demands for the Rental Housing Trust Fund, for DERF, for HPHA, something like $200 million was allocated by you folks for those funds. And I think we're seeing part of the impact of that now in the governor's emergency declaration on housing. More transitional housing projects are starting to come online. And it's not just the governor. The mayor has pushed those things also. And then very recently, private developers are stepping up to do more in the way of affordable housing. Several people have commented to me that, oh, more housing, affordable housing seems to be coming online. So people are perceiving that. But what you folks and maybe the developers are seeing is a more difficult situation for you folks and for them in terms of, getting projects on the move. But on the political side, not with the housing committees, but with money committees, what we have been told when we ask for more funding for the Rental Housing Trust Fund, for example, is why should we give them any more money when it takes so long for them to get the funding out to the developers? We do run into that. They have enough. They're sitting on millions. Why should we give them any more now? It's what I foresee is that in a couple of years, the production of affordable housing is again going to go downward because the reaction of HHFDC is we don't have enough to put out money to the developers. Okay? That's the kind of dynamic that is developing. You know, the developer says, well, we got to get commitment from HHFDC in order to get commitments from the more private funding sources or even other government funding sources. So you folks gave them, where last year it was about $200 million for those three sources that I mentioned. It was cut in half, even though the governor's ask was similar to last year's. So now I foresee Craig having to tell the developers, well, we don't have as much to give you. And so the whole capital stack gets backed up. So that's input I hope will be helpful to get this flow of housing moving. But part of it develops when you have multi-million-dollar homes and condos selling, and the contribution to the rental housing trust fund or whatever is down, and it gives us the emotional point at which to say developers should be contributing more, and the dynamic is not good. So, thank you.
And are there any questions for Reverend? I have a couple questions which you reminded me of, maybe of David also, because I had the same thought maybe when you were sitting there. I was saying to myself, Giovanni was talking and Christine was talking, I was saying, do they have lobbyists at the Capitol, or do they have, do they have, who speaks for them at the Capitol?
Who's they?
Well, some of the issues that came up, issues that came up with Giovanni and Christine,
Yeah.
I was familiar with them, but I don't hear them each session at the Capitol so much.
I think we need to do more education. I think everybody needs to do more education, the developers and the government agencies and the advocates. And
Yeah.
we should do it all together.
So from
everybody's in the same
because I
room.
know that you've been at the legislature and you've advocated very proficiently, do you feel their message has been getting across from what they're saying?
No, because it gets lost in the political stuff. So I think if we can listen to Reverend Bob, we can listen to Christine, we can listen to the people who spoke and kind of be focused on those issues. And there were two resolutions that were passed, Senate concurrent resolutions, and both of them said the parties should work together on things like that, on what Reverend Bob and Christine and Giovanni said, that, there's all this money in the rental housing trust fund, and more money was given last year in 2016, and I guess the money committees this year said, hey, you didn't use all of that, right? So the resolutions that were passed this year, two of them, in fact, it's in my report, said, everybody, let's go back, all work together and see how we can more efficiently spend these so we can give money to Christine, and to EAH. I don't know if I want to give to EAH because they don't like in lieu fees. But no.
It sounds like you're saying we
Everybody should. But I think working with the various agencies, I think Reverend Bob said a very important thing. We're not going to get money from the money committees if we don't show how we're using it and it's being used efficiently.
Well, and in a way, I think I hear what you're saying. You're saying we should all go to the Finance Committee.
No.
But you see, Reverend Bob, he's advocating from the heart.
Yeah.
But I think what we've heard here is maybe like from the head, we're hearing the numbers and stuff. And if that advocacy gets to the Finance Committees, I think they see this a little differently.
Yes, and in fact,
We don't get much of anywhere with the money committees.
No, but see, your argument or your proponent, your information is coming from the heart, which is important. But I think the money committees need to hear that message, and that it's coming from numbers, and it's coming from like something sort of thought out regarding the real estate process and that type of construction.
and we've been talking with, I talked to Stanford this morning, and I've been talking to Reverend Bob over the past several weeks, and we want to get together so that the developers, Christine, Harry Saunders, and Stanford, can explain it to the advocates, and then come and explain it to the legislators and explain it to the council members. And we're setting up meetings as we speak. To help share that information, so it's shared and everybody understands it, everybody can ask their questions, because it's very complicated and convoluted, but you guys have hit on all the simple and main things that, a lot of money is being given, we need to spend it wisely, and there's certain ways you can, like Christine said, you can get more bang for your buck. And obviously Kevin has figured out, with all the success of EAH, how to get the most bang for your buck. So we need everybody at the table to do this. But you're right, it's a matter of communication and understanding what's going on. It's not an easy thing.
And let me just conclude and hand it to Chair Sparrow, that so on your part and those who advocate for some of what we heard today, I think we need you to keep reminding legislators of what type of bills to get in there, and then we'll work the best we can over the political hurdles. but I'm not as proficient in this knowledge as I need to be, and that's why we need those advocates to focus us on bills they think will be important to get more affordable housing.
You know, we were Stanford and some of the experienced developers were very impressed with the bills that came out of your two committees. Vice Chair Nakamura's bills, your bills, Senator Sparrow's bills, and they show a level of knowledge and a willingness to get into the issues and dig deep. And, and Representative Hashem was chair too. He also, was into the infrastructure issues. So you folks are doing a great job of understanding and trying to understand. But we need to do a better job. I'm sorry, we'll do a better job.
Yeah, but maybe the fundamental thing I'm putting across is on the advocate side, we feel tremendously outgunned going up against.
Well, that's what we're here to help you.
Yeah, and you folks have been effective the last couple of sessions. The bills that came forward that are getting praised right now are because I feel you folks have listened to some of our concerns. Now we need to get the money guys to.
Right. And with that, I want to thank you and everybody who is here. Like I said, this is the third in a series of hearings for us to better understand the situation and problem out there and see how all of us can work together to solve this housing crisis. The city and county, thank you for coming to our hearings, the developers, the nonprofit, the members of the legislature. We do want to put together a realistic package of bills next session that have a chance of passing and actually making a difference. And we're going to need the city and county support. We're going to need the advocate support. And hopefully we are able in our positions to guide this process so that we can build more affordable housing and rentals and take care of our homeless problem. Final?
If you would have asked for $10 billion, I think you would have gotten $2 billion.
Okay.
We have another question from
We'll do that next session then, 10 billion.
You got to think big. You have to think big, right?
Vice Chair.
Yes, I do have a question. A lot has been said about in lieu fees, and we do have county representatives here. So I would like to get, because they're here, just their
Are
reaction.
you willing or able to say something?
Reaction to some of the
Kathy O'Hara?
recommendations, that there be some sort of linkage. More than one speaker mentioned linking the county in lieu fees with the state HFDC. So we appreciate your thoughts and comments.
Is this Debbie Downer time? Remember
Not yet, not yet.
last meeting, there was
Not
Debbie
yet.
Downer time?
Kathy Sokugawa, Acting Director from Department of Planning and Permitting at City and County. Right now, we do have an in lieu fee program. It's not well used for a couple, 2, 3 reasons. One of which is, right now we're doing with green home builders, and so they're much more they're more preferred to give us the units than to give us the cash, because that's their job, that's their business. And the second thing is the Debbie Downer part is the council said, I will decide what your in lieu fee is. So you have to come to me to determine the fee. Yeah, so then they go, well, we're not going to do that. And so they avoid paying the fee. So we have not received a fee for several years as an in lieu fee.
But you did
But we do have a
mention
program
that you
for
have a couple million, someone mentioned you have
Yes.
a couple million
Yes.
in your in lieu fee
Yes.
program. Would the city and county be willing to, I mean, is there a targeted use for those funds, or is it just sitting there?
Right now, again, they have not been added to for a while.
Yeah.
So that money is not growing.
Yeah.
And we haven't decided, $2 million is not a whole lot of money.
It's not, but it
So-
could be used, for example, if a project has received some tax credit projects or rental housing trust fund, and they just, revolving fund funds, and they
Right.
just need a little more equity to make it work, perhaps some sort of agreement between HHFDC, it could be the city
Right,
and county's
right.
money.
Right. We
but
could be more
an
active.
informal, it doesn't even have to be, done by statute or
Right,
anything, but
right.
some agreement to
Right.
have an open line of communication so that funding might be available.
We can, and we can be more active in how we manage that money. But right now, my understanding is that it has to be a line item in the operating budget. So it's not something where administratively we can loan it out. It has to be a line item in the budget. So someone would have to come to us and ask to use it, and it's a whole different type of
So
process.
developers, that's the answer. Get it in your line item, work with your council members to get it in as a line item, or with the administration.
So the second part of our position is, in the future, especially for TOD, but in the future, administration does support in lieu fees, not as a standard bread and butter option, but in situations where it just doesn't work for whatever reasons. It's a very small project. It's a project that at the end of the day couldn't sell. The market was totally off and they just timed it wrong, whatever. So we feel it's an emergency type of way to solve their obligation. Council has a little different feeling, my understanding. I should not speak for them, but my sense is that they're concerned that we will collect fees and nothing will happen with the fees. And so they'd rather have the units than the fees. And I think that's where you have 3 points of view. The third point of view would be from the developer, who may want that as a serious option to actually providing the fees. And so there's 3 points, 3 positions on that issue.
And-
Harrison, did you want to add to that?
Thank you.
And you mentioned you're working on some in lieu fee legislation. Will there be some type of matrix or standard so that it's not project by project determined by the council?
Yes, and so that's in the pending bills that we have before the city council right now.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Do you have any comments about the issue of EIS and the need for the EIS?
Um,
The-
Yeah, let me be a little philosophical. Still not Debbie Downer, though.
Yeah, don't mind him.
We all, I think, believe that affordable housing needs a lot more attention. But as the Reverend has mentioned, we also have many public policies that are very dear to many of our hearts, whether it's historic preservation, whether it's community design. You've heard all of the other competing public policy issues. And so one of the others that I'm not sure was mentioned earlier was transparency and public participation in the process. And so that's what the EIS process provides. Yes, it's very expensive, but it's also a way for any public person or organization to comment on a project that may not necessarily be there for other permitting avenues. So I'm not opposed personally to eliminating that, but just understanding that it's not just an expense and a process and time, but it's a participatory process as well.
Right, but even without that EIS, let's say we were able to remove it in some cases, the participation would still come as a project goes to the city council or whatever the case may be, right?
Yes,
There is
yes.
always that committee hearing and council hearing that has to be done and completed.
I'm not going to say that it's for every project, that they have to go to council or that they're going to use some other trigger for EIS.
Right.
There may be situations where they don't have it, but, you know, I'm willing to look at it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth the conversation, which is why we're having these hearings. Again, if we could expedite the building of affordable housing, that's what we want to do.
For the advocacy committee to eliminate that would become a real problem because the balance of power,
Understood, no.
without those kinds of things in place, we would feel like it would be just too easy to brush us aside.
Well, and that's why as decision makers, policy makers, we'd have to see, can we find a balance? And if I may use the word compromise, where maybe you don't need that full EIS, we could do a EIS minus. A junior EIS.
Like a Trump
Right.
EIS. See, that would be
Yeah,
really.
because, no, we don't want to exclude the public out of these projects. None of us want that. But can we minimize that expense for the developer so that at the end of the project, the cost is less? That's all we're talking about. And if the cost is less, maybe you could build more and/or build quicker.
Senator, if I could add just quickly to that, what you have described and what Mr. Mullo is asking for is actually what the city is doing in its TOD zoning. And so if neighborhoods have gone through the years and multiple meetings to create a community TOD plan, once council passes that new TOD zoning, if it meets those criteria and it's following the plan, that extensive environmental review is not needed. You can go either write the building permit or go to a 6-month major process. If it's a major project, like the one that Christine showed, it would still be a 6-month permit process, but you don't have to go through all the extra hoops because you're building what the community asks for in the right place, and the impacts are minimal.
I got a question.
Okay, Rep.
No, based upon your comment. So are you saying that when you go through the TOD planning, right, and are you gonna change the zoning on the underlying properties? Are you gonna do comprehensive zoning for around that area? Because a lot of times you create the plans, say this is the intent of, we're gonna residential in this area, but the underlying zoning of the property still might be preservation. Will you upzone at that time, or will the individual lot have to come in and rezone it? to your plan?
At any given point, and we can, have a beer on this, but there's predictability and flexibility, right? And that is an art, it's not a science. And so that's always going to weigh. So what I'm leading up to is, yes, we're pre-zoning everything. So none of the TOD projects have to come through the gauntlet of 343 and significant zone change. We will give them the zoning. We have, in fact, the zoning maps for Waipahu is sitting at City Council ready to be adopted. The issue, though, is you still have to go through some kind of a permitting process with the City Council. Yeah, so there's still a discretionary review, but we've saved you the time and cost of the EIS process already that's our commitment to TOD, part of our commitment.
To upzone, right?
To upzone, right.
Or downzone, whichever way it
Well,
goes.
we're hardly doing any downzoning. Yeah.
Up to Middle Street? So,
No, the whole,
so,
no.
this is within a half mile?
It's organic. So half mile is some arbitrary number. So what we've done is we've walked every station area and said what areas are going to be influenced by having a train station here. So if you look at our boundaries and our proposed zoning for TOD, it's very irregular looking because it's based on actual on-the-ground evaluation of what would be influenced by a train station there.
Those plans have all been developed in at least draft form. So when we're reviewing under an interim permit right now, the kind that Christine would use on that project, you just have to comply even with the draft plan, basically. And by the way, I should mention that we just delivered all of those documents to the Legislative Research Bureau and gave them a CD. So if you want anything the city has, everything that we've developed in terms of the plans, the zoning, those maps are all there. You can look at them. I should mention it also includes our study of value capture and potential for TOD to contribute to funding infrastructure and rail as well. So you have all those documents now.
So that issue that we heard of uncertainty, we are attempting to deal with that so that there is more certainty when somebody invests in a piece of property and want to build a project.
That's a critical point. I'm glad Christine mentioned that because when council passed the interim plan development zoning we introduced it in 2013, it was passed in 2014. The goal was to make it flexible because we didn't want to pretend to know exactly what development would work. So we've since done enough studies to say, okay, this is the percentage of affordable housing that should be required. We've done the pro forma analysis. And so the original interim plan development is very flexible as long as you're meeting the community plan and delivering on community benefits. We have a Bill 15 in front of council right now that would actually take away some of that flexibility and set a minimum affordable housing requirement in return. That's kind of the predictability that Christine was asking for. And actually, she mentioned 10 and 30, it's right in the middle, it's 20% is what's proposed. So council, once council adopts that, you'll have the predictability with still some flexibility to be creative in the project.
And these bills you mentioned before the council, are these going to be passed in the next few weeks, months? Do we know?
We hope next few months, but we would never want to get in front of council.
Okay. Closing comment, Reverend.
I want to emphasize.
Into the mic, please.
I want to emphasize again the imbalance in power that we feel. Again, remember, most of us are social workers, pastors, or whatever. We don't have the depth of experience in the financial side of things. And we feel that very deeply. We tried to arrange so that some people are at HCDA. They're having a meeting, I forget exactly what time, on their workforce housing rules.
Right.
There are meetings going on right now about rail. And if by some chance rail doesn't go through, TOD is going to be far less effective. So we have that concern too. We feel that in this last 6-month time period, we have been pushed to the side on the housing issues.
And that's part of why we are having this hearing and having your elected officials chosen by the people trying to get a good grasp
Stop
and
these
better
lobbyists.
grasp. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us. You have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
And then
Thank
think
you,
about
Kathy.
rail not going through, we're going to strike that from the record.